welcome you to the official podcast of the Fish Wrapper publication, bringing you story content to inspire, encourage, and uplift the soul. It's our hope you find these stories refreshing, thought-provoking, and motivating as you face the challenges of everyday life. So turn us up and tune your ears, and let's get started by jumping right into the story.
The Buller Podington Pact, Part 2, read by Michael D'Annunzio. Thomas Buller and William Podington were best friends. They had been schoolboys together and had been associated in business since they were young men. They had now reached middle-aged, were married, and each had a place they called home. But during all these years, neither of them had visited the other. The reason for this avoidance of each other at their respective residences may be briefly stated. Mr. Buller's house was situated by the sea, and he was very fond of the water. He had a good boat, which he had sailed himself, and it was his greatest pleasure to take his friends and visitors upon little excursions on the bay. But Mr. Podington was desperately afraid of the water, and he was particularly afraid of any craft sailed by an amateur. Podington did not wish to wound the self-love of his friend, and he did not wish to be drowned. Consequently, he could not bring himself to consent to go to Buller's house by the sea. To receive his good friend Buller at his own house in the beautiful upland region in which he lived would have been a great joy to Mr. Podington. But Buller could not be induced to visit him. Podington was very fond of horses and always drove himself, while Buller was more afraid of horses than he was of elephants or lions. He did not wish to hurt his friend's feelings by refusing to go out to drive with him. But why should he rack his own nervous system by accompanying him? Therefore, it was that he had not yet visited the beautiful upland country residence of Mr. Podington. One day, when Mr. Podington had just repeated his annual invitation, his friend replied to him thus: "William, if I come to see you this summer, will you visit me?" Thus it was that Mr. Buller went to visit at Mr. Podington's residence. At this juncture of the story, the two men have experienced quite the adventure and are in the process of trying to get out of their predicament. Now the submarine equipage came to a low place in the bottom, and even Mr. Buller shuddered as the water rose to his chin. Podington gave a howl of horror, and the horse, with high uplifted head, was obliged to swim. At this moment, a boy with a gun came strolling along the road, and hearing Mr. Podington's cry, he cast his eyes over the water. Instinctively, he raised his weapon to his shoulder, and then, in an instant, perceiving that the objects he held were not aquatic birds, he dropped his gun and ran yelling down the road toward the mill. But the hollow in the bottom was a narrow one, and when it was passed, the depth of the water gradually decreased. The back of the horse came into view, and the dashboard became visible, and the bodies and the spirits of the two men rapidly rose. Now there was a vigorous splashing and tugging, and then a jet-black horse, shining as if he had been newly varnished, pulled a dripping wagon containing two well-soaked men upon a shelving shore.
"Oh, I am chilled to the bones,"
said Podington. "I should think so," replied his friend. "If you've got to be wet, it's a great deal pleasanter under the water." There was a field road on this side of the pond which Podington knew well, and proceeding along this, they came to the bridge and got into the main road.
"Now we must get home as fast as we can,"
cried Podington.
"or we shall both take cold. I wish I hadn't lost my whip. Hi now, get along."
Podington was now full of life and energy. His wheels were on the hard road, and he was himself again. When he found his head and was turned toward his home, the horse set off at a great rate.
"Hi there,"
cried Podington.
"I am so sorry I lost my whip."
"Whip?" said Buller, holding fast to the side of the seat. "Surely you don't want him to go any faster than this? And look here, William," he added. "It seems to me we are much more likely to take cold in our wet clothes if we rush through the air in this way. Really, it seems to me that the horse is running away,
Not a bit of it.
cried Podington.
He wants to get home, and he wants his dinner. Isn't he a fine horse? Look how he steps out.
Steps out, said Buller. I think I'd like to step out myself. Don't you think it would be wiser for me to walk home, William?
It will take you an hour, said his friend. Stay where you are, and I'll have you in a dry suit of clothes in less than 15 minutes.
I tell you, William, said Mr. Buller, as the two sat relaxing after dinner. What you ought to do, you should never go out driving without a life preserver and a pair of oars. I always take them. It would make you feel safer. Mr. Buller went home the next day because Mr. Podington's clothes did not fit him, and his own outdoor suit was so shrunken as to be uncomfortable. Besides, there was another reason, connected with the desire of horses to reach their homes, which prompted his return. But he had not forgotten his compact with his friend, and in the course of a week he wrote to Podington, inviting him to spend some days with him. Mr. Podington was a man of honor, and in spite of his recent unfortunate water experience, he would not break his word. He went to Mr. Buller's seaside home at the time appointed. Early in the morning, after his arrival, before the family were up, Mr. Podington went out and strolled down to the edge of the bay. He went out to look at Buller's boat. He was well aware that he would be asked to take a sail, and as Buller had driven with him, it would be impossible for him to decline sailing with Buller, but he must see the boat. There was a train for his home at 7:15. If he were not on the premises, he could not be asked to sail. If Buller's boat were a little, flimsy thing, he would take the train. But he would wait and see. There was only one small boat anchored near the beach, and a man, apparently a fisherman, informed Mr. Podington that it belonged to Mr. Buller. Podington looked at it eagerly. It was not very small, and not flimsy.
Do you consider that a safe boat?
He asked the fisherman.
Safe,
The man replied.
you could not upset her if you tried. Look at her breadth of beam. You could go anywhere in that boat. Are you thinking of buying her?
The idea that he would think of buying a boat made Mr. Podington laugh. The information that it would be impossible to upset the little vessel had greatly cheered him, and he could laugh. Shortly after breakfast, Mr. Buller, like a nurse with a dose of medicine, came to Mr. Podington with the expected invitation to take a sail.
Now, William, said his host, I understand perfectly your feelings about boats, and what I wish to prove to you is that it is a feeling without any foundation. I don't want to shock you or make you nervous, so I am not going to take you out today on the bay in my boat. You are as safe here on the bay as you would be on land. A little safer, perhaps, under certain circumstances, but still, it is sometimes a little rough, and this, at first, might cause you some uneasiness, and so I'm going to let you begin your education in the sailing line on perfectly smooth water. About 3 miles back of us, there's a very pretty lake, several miles long. It is a part of the canal system, which connects the town with the railroad. I have sent my boat to the town, and we can walk up there and go by the canal to the lake. It is only about 3 miles.
If he had to set sail at all, this kind of sailing suited Mr. Podington. A canal, a quiet lake, and a boat which could not be upset. When they reached the town, the boat was in the canal, ready for them.
Now, said Mr. Buller, you get in and make yourself comfortable. My idea is to hitch onto the canal boat and be towed to the lake. The boats generally start about this time in the morning, and I will go and see about it.
Mr. Podington, under the direction of his friend, took a seat in the stern of the sailboat, and then he remarked,
Thomas, have you any kind of life preserver on board? You know I'm not used to any kind of vessel, and I am clumsy. Nothing might happen to the boat, but I might trip and fall overboard, and I can't swim.
All right, said Buller. Here's a life preserver, and you can put it on. I want you to feel perfectly safe. Now I will go and see about the tow.
But Mr. Buller found that the canal boats would not start at their usual time. The loading of one of them was not finished, and he was informed that he might have to wait for an hour or more. This did not suit Mr. Buller at all, and he did not hesitate to show his annoyance.
I tell you, sir, what can you do?
I tell you, sir, what you can do,
said one of the men, in charge of the boats.
"If you don't want to wait till we're ready to start, we'll let you have a boy and a horse to tow you up to the lake. That won't cost you much, and they'll be back before we want 'em."
The bargain was made, and Mr. Buller joyfully returned to his boat with the intelligence that they were not to wait for the canal boats. A long rope, with a horse attached to the other end of it, was speedily made fast to the boat, and with the boy at the head of the horse, they started up the canal.
We hope you've been enjoying the story. We will continue in just a moment. We want to remind you that the Fish Wrapper is available by subscription. Each issue of the Fish Wrapper is jam-packed with story content, amazing recipes, games, jokes, and much, much more. Our readers never want to miss an issue. And you can order yours today by visiting www.thefishwrapperonline.com or by calling 717-400-FISH. That number again is 717-400-FISH. Now let's return and finish the story.
"Now this is the kind of sailing I like,"
said Mr. Podington.
"If I lived near a canal, I believe I would buy a boat and train my horse to tow. I could have a pair of rope lines and drive him myself. Then when the roads were rough and bad, the canal would always be smooth."
This is all very nice,
replied Mr. Buller, who sat by the tiller to keep the boat away from the bank.
and I am glad to see you in a boat under any circumstances. Do you know, William, that although I did not plan it, there could not have been a better way to begin your sailing education. Here we glide along slowly and gently, with no possible thought of danger. For if the boat should suddenly spring a leak, as if it were the body of a wagon, all we would have to do would be to step on the shore. And by the time you get to the end of the canal, you will like this gentle motion so much that you will be perfectly ready to begin the second stage of your nautical education.
"Yes,"
said Mr. Podington.
"How long did you say this canal is?"
About 3 miles, answered his friend. Then we will go into the lock, and in a few minutes we shall be on the lake.
"So as far as I am concerned,
said Mr. Podington.
I wish the canal were 12 miles long. I cannot imagine anything more pleasanter than this. If I lived anywhere near a long canal, I mean. This one is too short. I'd..."
Come now, interrupted Buller. Don't be content to stay in the primary school just because it is easy. When we get on the lake, I will show you that in a boat with a gentle breeze, such as we are likely to have today, you will find the motion quite pleasing, and so much more inspiriting. I should not be a bit surprised, William, if after you've been 2 or 3 times on the lake, you will ask me, yes, positively ask me, to take you out on the bay.
Mr. Podington smiled, and leaning backward, he looked up at the beautiful blue sky.
"You can't give me anything better than this, Thomas," said he. "But you needn't think that I'm weakening. You drove with me, and I will sail with you."
The thought came into Buller's mind that he had done both of these things with Podington, but he did not wish to call up any unpleasant memories, and said nothing. About half a mile from the town, there stood a small cottage where house cleaning was going on, and on a fence, not far from the canal, there hung a carpet galley adorned with stripes and spots of red and yellow. When the drowsy tow horse came abreast of the house, and the carpet caught his eye, he suddenly stopped and gave a start toward the canal. Then, impressed with a horror of the glaring apparition, he gathered himself up, and with a bound dashed along the towpath. The astounded boy gave a shout, but was speedily left behind. The boat of Mr. Buller shot forward as if she had been struck by a squall. The terrified horse sped on as if a red and yellow demon were after him. The boat bounded and plunged and frequently struck the grassy bank of the canal, as if it would break itself into pieces. Mr. Podington clutched the boom to keep himself from being thrown out, while Mr. Buller, both hands upon the tiller, frantically endeavored to keep the boat from the bank.
"William!" he screamed. "He's running away with us! We shall be dashed to pieces! Can't you get forward and cast off the line?"
What do you mean?"
cried Podington. as the boom gave a great jerk, as if it would break its fastenings and drag him overboard.
I mean, untie the tow line. We'll be smashed if you don't. I can't leave this tiller. Don't try to stand up. Hold on to the boom and creep forward. Steady now, or you'll be thrown overboard.
Mr. Podington stumbled to the bow of the boat. His efforts greatly impeded by the big cork life preserver tied under his arms, and the motion of the boat was so violent and erratic that he was obliged to hold on to the mast with one arm and to try and loosen the knot with the other. But there was a great strain on the rope, and he could do nothing with one hand.
Cut it! Cut it!
Cried Mr. Buller.
I haven't a knife,
replied Podington. Mr. Buller was terribly frightened. His boat was cutting through the water as never a vessel of her class had sped since sailboats were invented, and bumping against the bank as if she were a billiard ball rebounding from the edge of the table. He forgot he was in a boat. He only knew that for the first time in his life, he was in a runaway. He let go of the tiller. It was of no use to him.
William! He cried. Let us jump out the next time we are near enough to the shore.
Don't do that! Don't do that!
Replied Podington.
Don't jump out in a runaway. That is the way to get hurt. Stick to your seat, my boy. He can't keep this up much longer. He'll lose his wind.
Mr. Podington was greatly excited, but he was not frightened as Buller was. He had been in a runaway before, and he could not help thinking how much better a wagon was than a boat in such a case.
If he were to hitch up shorter, and I had a shackle bit and a snout pair of reins,
thought he,
I could soon bring him up.
But Mr. Buller was rapidly losing his wits. The horse seemed to be going faster than ever, and the boat bumped harder against the bank, and at one time Buller thought they could turn over. Suddenly a thought struck him.
William,
he shouted,
tip that anchor over the side and throw it in.
Mr. Podington looked at him and, almost under his feet, saw the anchor. He did not instantly comprehend why Buller wanted it thrown overboard, but this was not a time to ask questions. The difficulties imposed by the life preserver and the necessity of holding on with one hand interfered much with his getting at the anchor and throwing it over the side. But at last he succeeded, and just as the boat threw up her bow as if it were about to jump on shore, the anchor went out and its line shot after it. There was an irregular trembling of the boat as the anchor struggled along the bottom of the canal. Then there was a great shock, and the boat ran into the bank and stopped. The tow line was tightened like a guitar string, and the horse, jerked back with great violence, came tumbling into a heap upon the ground. Instantly, Mr. Podington was on the shore and running at the top of his speed toward the horse. The astounded animal had scarcely begun to struggle to his feet when Podington rushed upon him, pressed his head back to the ground, and sat upon it.
Hurrah!
He cried, waving his hat above his head.
Get out, Buller. He's all right now.
Presently, Mr. Buller approached, very much shaken up.
All right,
he said.
I don't call a horse flat on the road with a man on his head, all right. But hold him down till we get him loose from my boat. This is the thing to do. William, cast him loose from the boat before you let him up. What will he do when he gets up?
Oh, he'll quiet enough when he gets up,
said Podington.
But if you've got a knife, you can cut these traces. I mean that rope. But no, you needn't. Here comes the boy. We'll settle this business in very short order now.
When the horse was on his feet, and all connection between the animal and the boat had been severed, Mr. Podington looked at his friend.
Thomas,
said he,
you seem to have had a hard time of it. You've lost your hat, and you've looked as if you've been in a wrestling match.
I have,
replied the other.
I wrestled with that tiller, and I wonder it didn't throw me out.
Now approached the boy.
Shall I hitch him on again, sir?
He said.
He's quiet now.
No, cried Mr. Buller. I want no more sailing after a horse. And besides, we can't go on the lake with that boat. She has been battered about so much that she must have opened a dozen seams. The best thing we can do is to walk home.
Mr. Podington agreed with his friend that walking home was the best thing they could do. The boat was examined and found to be leaking, but not very badly. And when her mast had been unshipped and everything had been made tight and right on board, she was pulled out of the way of the tow lines and boats, and be made fast until she could be sent for from the town. Mr. Buller and Mr. Podington walked back to the town. They had not gone very far when they met a party of boys, who, upon seeing them, burst into unseemly laughter.
Mister,
Cried one of them.
you needn't be afraid of tumbling into the canal. Why don't you take off your life preserver and let the other men put it on his head?
The two friends looked at each other and could not help but joining in the laughter of the boys.
Oh my, I forgot all about this.
Said Podington, as he unfastened the cork jacket.
It does look a little super timid to wear a life preserver just because one happens to be walking by the side of a canal.
Mr. Buller tied a handkerchief on his head, and Mr. Podington rolled up his life preserver and carried it under his arm. Thus they reached the town, where Buller had bought a hat, and Podington dispensed with his bundle, and arrangements were made to bring back the boat.
Run away in a sailboat!
Exclaimed one of the canal boatmen when he had heard about the accident.
Upon my word, that beats anything that could happen to a man.
No, it doesn't, replied Mr. Buller quietly. I have gone to the bottom in a foundered road wagon. The man looked at him fixedly.
Was you ever stuck in the mud in a balloon?
He asked. Not yet, replied Mr. Buller. It required 10 days to put Mr. Buller's sailboat into proper condition, and for 10 days Mr. Podington stayed with his friend and enjoyed his visit very much. They strolled on the beach. They took long walks in the back country. They fished from the end of a pier. They talked and were happy and content.
Thomas,
Said Mr. Podington on the last evening of his stay.
I have enjoyed myself very much since I have been down here. And now, Thomas, if I were to come down again next summer, would you mind? Would you mind not?
I would not mind it a bit, replied Buller promptly. I'll never so much as mention it, so you can come along without a thought of it. And since you have alluded to the subject, William, he continued, I'd like very much to come to see you again. You know, my visit was a very short one this year. It is a beautiful country you live in, such a variety of scenery, such an opportunity for walks and rambles. But, William, if you could only make up your mind not to...
Oh, that's all right,
Exclaimed Podington.
I do not need to make up my mind. You come to my house, and you will never so much as hear of it. Here's my hand upon it.
And here's mine,
Said Mr. Buller, and they shook hands over a new compact. The end.
We hope that you enjoyed this story and will join us again soon when we unravel another adventure from the pages of the Fish Wrapper. We encourage you to like and subscribe to this podcast, ensuring that you never miss a new episode. See you again soon, and may our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ guide you.